Okay, welcome everybody to the third class of Constellations for Individuals. We have a large group of people here. Lynn has given her apology. She says she's not well this evening. And we're just waiting for Jade and Anna Maria, I believe, is who's missing at this point. So welcome everybody. So the first thing I want to do is the first thing we did last time is just a few minutes to our topic last time was constellation meditations, as well as what do facilitators look for and notice in constellations. You were sent off to create a meditation for yourself or someone else. And so I'm curious about what your experiences are and lingering questions and your miracle healings, please share. So just raise your hand if there's something you would like to share or you have a question. I'm here, great.
Hi everyone. I just did a constellation about 2 weeks ago with someone. She had this chronic body pain that was just for years and years, she said, and the doctors couldn't just find a cure for it. And she reported last night that it's gone from her body. It's just not there anymore. And she's shocked and surprised as to how this could be so quick.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Change isn't always like that, but it's very nice on those occasions when it is. It's really sweet. Yeah. That was a group constellation, I assume, yes?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Any shares or comments or questions from the material in the last week? Did anyone get sort of excited about how they might use these meditations in classes or in other kinds of contexts? Already found yourself using them? Ruth has her hand up.
Well, actually, that's kind of how would we use these? Bonnie and I worked on one, and she did more of it because I didn't have much time for homework this week. But it's just kind of wondering when it's used and sort of how deep to go in the meditation versus, if it's prep for a constellation or if it's a standalone.
Yeah, there's a wide variety of circumstances in which you could use this. Imagine that you get invited to do a talk for 500 people and you actually want them to have a constellation experience. This is one way you could actually give them one, right? People who come to my constellations know I do an opening meditation. It's very standard and short and ritualistic. The place I use them the most is workshops. Let's say the theme is money or health. And then you can use this as one of the exercises. Under those circumstances, I want those meditations to be longish so that people have a real experience of their own in it. Yeah? And again, I encourage everyone to come to my one Wednesday night a month business clearing calls. They always have a topic, and I almost always do a constellation meditation. Actually, two. I have the standard one, which a lot of you know, which is the Heart of Business constellation, which is now just sort of standard. And then I'll create a new one for the topic. The next one is Healing the Inner Victim. So I'll come up with something around that theme. And so you can really, if you don't come to those because you don't feel it's like very useful for you personally, you don't have a business or you don't need that kind of help, you might come to be exposed to more ways of doing constellations. Yeah. The next one is October 5th, I think. Go to my events page. I believe is the next one. But please come to them. Or if you can't come to them, ask for the recordings. One of the things that Constellation folk often struggle with is, what is my business model? How can I actually make an income? And so the Constellations for Individuals approaches is to be able to do this work with individuals. Hi, Anna Maria, welcome. But another thing is to be able to do workshops where you're not necessarily giving everybody an hour and a half constellation. You have lots of smaller exercises, and everybody can pay $50 or $75 rather than, a group constellation which may cost $200 or whatever. Yeah. So it just expands your toolkit. By the way, you can also, they're also a very useful tool on yourself for self-healing. Other questions? Did anyone come up with a meditation that you really liked, that's really seemed to support or help somebody or yourself? Okay.
Leslie?
Yeah.
I just wanted to say one way that I'm hoping to use the meditation is actually one-on-one with some of my clients. I think it would be a really good way to introduce people to the concepts of family constellations, just getting them used to connecting with their ancestors and with the relationship there. I haven't tried it yet, but I'm thinking that it would be a way to introduce them just to the idea of what a constellation is about. So just thought I'd toss that out there.
Excellent. Perfect. Thank you for thinking creatively about this stuff. It's also possible for those of you who do other modalities, like Linda's psychotherapy, some of you do NLP. It's easier to put in a little meditation as part of the process if that seems to fit in. The other thing that I'm going to make the point about today, because the topics is constellations in the mind, is that although they're different, they can actually also, there can be elements of both in a constellation. And I'll say more about that later on. But having ritualistic elements, just generally, whether you have them in a group context or in a individual context, is really, really useful to have. Steal from other facilitators like crazy in this regard. At Bernried in Germany in May, I have found that in certain circles there's a real distinction between what we might call regular constellations and ritual constellations. And that would be in a group context. It's not about something emerging from the field. It's about doing something in the field in a ritual kind of a way. And in a sense, the constellation meditations are an in the mind version of those ritual constellations. And you've all seen stuff like this, like, the women on the inside and the men on the outside facing outward. That's a ritual constellation, those kinds of things, if you've seen them. Okay, well, I want to very briefly just go into our review topic for the evening. I don't have PDFs on this because I really do want to focus on, I'm realizing constellations in the mind just needs more time. So that's what we're going to spend most of our time doing. But very briefly, I just wanted to touch on a topic that we could spend all night talking about, which is thinking systemically, or what we might call systemic intelligence. We've gotten used to thinking of emotional intelligence and kinesthetic intelligence and, different kinds of intelligences. And I've begun to really notice that there are people who really grow their capacity for systemic noticing, just generally in the world around them. And I'll give you a really simple example. I used to commute, don't commute anymore, but I used to commute Bay Area, nightmare, hated commuting. And I listened to NPR when I would commute, and every 10 minutes they'd have the traffic report as you're listening to the news. And every 10 minutes it would include an accident, often a fatality. And there was one day I was driving along in the midst of this thing, and I realized it was a system that we're all caught in. And it's a system that most people don't have much of a choice about, really. And it dehumanizes all of us. And my heart just opened in love for all the people who usually I'm swearing at, right? Like, wow, we're caught in this together. You know? So that's just applied systemic thinking. It's feeling the larger whole. It's a way of, instead of assuming a problem arises, it's about me, or it's about her or him. People who think systemically are asking, what's going on in the system is what they're doing. Every piece of information can become a portal into the system. Even stuff that, you know, at the front may not seem very relevant. So the example I always give is that if you have a pain in your knee, most doctors will focus on issues around the knee, but a craniosacral person will think what else is going on in the larger body. And the thing that's making the knee hurt may be located in the neck or somewhere else. Yeah. And that's what systemic thinking does. There are a billion different systemic frameworks. There's, you know, Murray Bowen's family systems. There's Theory U, which I'm stepping into a little bit myself. There's a bunch of them out there. Ours is family constellations. And the framework for us, as I reviewed in the first one, is the orders of love. So we something's not working, and we can ask ourselves, who's not getting to belong? You know, who's in the wrong role here? Where is there an imbalance in giving and taking? Where is a transgression that hasn't been addressed? What is present that's not being honored or included, et cetera, the orders of love. And so it gives us a way to think about systems. So, you know, you can really get stuck in this conflict what you're having with your friend or your family or your workplace. And there's something about thinking systemically that releases something for us a bit. I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me. I've been doing that a lot lately. Just a few more examples to share, and then I'll ask for questions, but we'll wrap this up. Another really strong example was the last job I had an assistant, and oh my God, did we trigger the crapola out of each other. We had to have been mirrors for something very dark. I don't know. I was her mom and she was my dad or something. I don't know. But holy crap, we could just get each other so upset. And it came to a point where I realized we're in each other's constellations. I've got a role in hers and she's got a role in mine. Yeah. And that's when I wasn't thinking that way. I think, you know, she's doing something wrong. I can see this thing she's doing wrong. Or if I was feeling more in the self-beating up mode, I could identify what I was doing wrong, right? Right? But the systemic view has a different point of view. Now, closer to home, how does this become really practical? And I've mentioned this to some of you in different contexts. If you find yourself getting triggered while you facilitate, it could be because you're getting tired and cranky and someone's being uncooperative, or maybe you've stepped into something in the system. When I'm getting angry at a client or a representative, I have just learned to train myself to ask myself what aspect of the system is coming through this crankiness. And sometimes I'll go so far as to call in a representative and say, will you please take this? And even if it turns out just to be about me, it's true. I didn't get enough sleep the night before. At least it gets put into something and it makes me more resourceful. But 9 times out of 10, it actually is expressing something really important in the system. Because I've gotten to a point where if I shake my finger at myself and say, Leslie, calm down, I do. I just put on my professional hat. And if that doesn't work, it's probably something compelling in the system. Or another example is a representative is being uncooperative in some way and making the group experience difficult somehow. If you can think systemically, what is coming through in this system through this representative's behavior right now, it actually is something you can kind of appreciate and be glad that it's showing up and be curious about. Here's a bone. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Okay. So 3 observations, things that have come up, and sometimes I find myself getting stuck in all 3 of these situations. The latest one was where the client was running their own constellation really full on, overriding everything that was happening.
Yeah.
That was one thing. The second thing was most of the participants in the constellation, they were just checking out like halfway through the constellation. They would just walk away and like go and get a cup of tea, and there was no coherence being maintained. And the third one was before the constellation started, all those who were there to support the client, they just kind of said, I don't think I want to participate in this anymore. Don't pull me into any of
Right.
So I'm like, okay, suddenly the group goes from 10 people to 3 people who can participate. And it's just a
holy crap, the system was just on a loudspeaker for you. Oh
yeah.
my God.
And
it was, yeah. Yeah, it's really, I mean, that's the system, I'm not going to make interpretations here because I wasn't there and I don't know the family system, but we can really feel how, especially when a whole group is kind of moving back, that's usually something worth being curious about. And obviously you can't force the other 7 to participate. But here's the bonus, is that when you point to a group to the possible systemics of something that's going on, like, wow, this is really interesting. A lot of people don't participate. I wonder what we're going to find out about this system tonight and about participation.
Right.
Just really simple language. You don't even have to go all interprety on it. When you do that, it can help support the group, which is starting to stress. Because that's stressful for a group to carry these energies. So it tends to calm them down and they become more tolerant of it and curious about the situation. If you just sort of name it, right? Okay. That's really interesting. This hasn't happened to me before. 7 people don't want to participate. I wonder what we're going to find out about this system tonight and about participation, something like that. The other thing I just want to say, and this is a different angle on systemics. It's not field systemics so much, but we are trained in our culture to aim for a non-domineering form of leadership, which I think generally is good. I think that's generally a good thing. But what we know from primate dynamics is if someone isn't taking the leadership role, someone else will try. There's always someone willing to sort of raise their hand. And so we just want to kind of notice, and my experience is that the first few years of facilitating is filled with experiences of participants who want to kind of take control. It's just part of it. And it's very challenging and it's very difficult. And as we grow in our sense of mastery, it sort of becomes less and less. And I remember when I was getting my NLP training, there's this eye exercise you do early on. It's very difficult. It's really frightening for all the students. And I was doing it for a particularly uncooperative fellow student. And she was saying, no, it's over here. And I just went to her, I said, name, let me be in charge. And she went, and obviously from moment to moment, figuring out how to tell a group, there can only be one person in charge of the constellation right now. You need to find ways to do that keep you in rapport. But there are certain people whose safety patterning is such that they're kind of ready to take charge pretty quickly, almost in any group. It's just part of primate dynamics. And again, just sort of have a friendly relationship with it if you can.
Yeah, and it's for the first time that I felt so annoyed and irritated towards the client. It's never happened before. And I was like, what is this? This is just
and
so
my
weird.
guess is that annoyance is a mother or a father or both. Okay. She was eliciting in you the parent who was annoyed at that when she was a little kid all along. Probably. Right? You were being recruited into a parental role. I mean, that's a whole different conversation I can't go into. Parental transferences, it's part of the healing arts, something we generally want to avoid, but that's always a possibility. And again, if I'm having, it doesn't matter, just if I'm having a really intense reaction, get someone to take that role. Just get somebody to take it.
Thank you.
Yeah. And if you only have 3 representatives, that may be difficult. You may have to put it into a chair or a pillow or something, an index card, but get it into something else. And if it's showing up that strongly, it's almost certainly highly relevant and important. Okay, my friends, any other questions about that? Because I'm going to shift gears into the constellations in the mind material. Okay, so thinking systemically. It doesn't come naturally in the Western world. It's not the way we're taught to think. It's not only about being in a constellation, but if you are on any committees or a family planning a reunion or, trying to talk to your school teacher, your kid's teacher or whatever it is, if you can think systemically, it supports you, it helps you tremendously. It really helps us get out of the blame frame. It's one of the more effective ways of moving out of it. Okay, so here's the way I would like to move forward. We're going to do so-called constellations in the mind, which are exactly like group constellations. We do it all inside here, okay? The client does it inside here. So we're not going to use cards. You can stay in your seats tonight. And I think the simplest way to get started is if someone would like to do a very short demo with me on a topic that we can tee up really fast, that we don't need to do a lot of interviewing on, and with the agreement that this is going to be partial. So it's just to sort of show how it's kind of done. Then I'm going to go into a bit of a lecture and then probably have a break and then move into the practice for most of the rest of the time. So who would like to have a very partial demo with me? Ellen's raising her hand.
You want me to describe the situation?
So again, I'm going to ask only for demos of people who can give me like the whole thing in like a minute. So we don't need to do a family interview or anything like that. Yeah? Go for it, Ellen.
I'm speaking with someone who I've had a bad experience with speaking, both good and bad experiences with before, right, on stage, and I want to have a good experience.
Sorry, not tracking. A person you're speaking with on stage. I don't have the picture. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so we're speaking together, right?
Oh,
And
like
we've
a
done it
panel or
before.
something.
Yeah, to a group. We're keynotes
Got
together,
it.
right? So we've been successful at that before. We've had some really bad experiences before. So,
And the bad, if you were to sum up bad, what do you mean by bad?
I was thinking about it when you said we trigger things in each other. I'm being his mom, he's being my dad, whatever that was, right? That sort of triggering.
Okay. And although we're not going to have a full constellation, the outcome you would like is what?
To be able to bring the best out in each other instead of the worst out in each other. Right?
Okay, good. For both you and for the poor audience, which is probably noticing, they look a little unhappy with each other right now. Okay, good. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to do the opening bits a little quickly because I know Ellen, and I know everyone here, it's not just Ellen, can move into this fairly quickly. So Ellen, I'm going to invite you to close your eyes, and I'm going to do the same thing. Just find your center. Oh, and what's the first name of this other person?
Paul.
Paul. Just find your center, find yourself. And then please imagine yourself in a space. Don't worry what kind of space too much, just a nice space. And imagine that Paul is standing near you, to your side. Left or right, it really doesn't matter. And at the right distance, a distance that feels good to you. So you're kind of side by side and you're looking forward into the space together. And then I would like you to imagine two more representatives. And I'm going to need just a second to explain these to you. These two representatives are going to be facing each other at a distance that feels good to you. And on one side is going to be a representation for whatever it is Paul's projecting onto you from his life, his system. And on the other side is going to be a representative for whatever you're projecting onto Paul from your system. Don't worry about thinking about that. Just label the representations, what Paul is projecting, what Ellen is projecting, and allow the field to manifest kind of the energy and feeling tone of these two. So you and Paul standing next to each other, looking at these two who are facing each other. And you are inside yourself, looking at these two facing each other, with Paul on your side, who's also looking at them. What do you notice as you're inside yourself, looking at those two and having Paul next to you?
Oh, I feel sick.
What point did you start to feel sick?
After I was sort of noticing their emotions, and then when you said that we were together looking at it,
Okay. Okay, so step out of the representation that is Ellen and just step into Paul, who's standing somewhere next to her at a good distance. Just step into Paul, looking at those two projections, looking at each other. Breathe in there a little bit, and when you have a sense of it, just tell me what it's like in there.
It's spacious and, you know, all-knowing.
So does it feel what we might call kind of good inside of Paul?
Yeah, whole.
From his point of view, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what's it like to have Ellen on his side?
Well, glad you're here.
So,
To support me. I'm glad you're here to support me.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So he said that out loud to Ellen?
No, he said it with his posture.
Okay. Would it be all right if he said it out loud?
Sure.
Yeah. So you can do that as Paul.
I'm glad you're here to support me.
Okay. So step out of Paul and just find a position where you can see all four of these representatives. Like maybe you're a client at a group constellation and four people are representing Ellen and Paul and their projections. So what do you notice? What's the arrangement? How close, how far away?
Yeah.
What do you notice?
The projections are very close.
Okay.
And the representatives for me and Paul are further apart.
Okay. How far away are they standing away from the other pair?
Like a triangle. So the same distance that Paul and Ellen are apart, they're sort of in front of them in the center is the...
Okay. And from the outside, what's the feeling tone of the system?
From the outside.
Yeah. Like, does it feel yummy to be around this foursome? Does it feel tense or confusing or low energy, high energy?
Yes, confusing because there appears to be this cool calmness and then there's this confrontation.
Oh, so confrontation. From the outside, it looks like a confrontation?
Yeah, the projections look like confrontation.
Okay.
But Paul and Ellen have some other kind of...
Okay, so just choose one arbitrarily, doesn't really matter. Just let me know which one you decide to step into first of the projections. Let me know what it's like.
I'm stepping into the thing that Paul is projecting on me.
Okay, so this is something from Paul's system.
I feel very small and kind of warm and but small, like I'm useful when I'm tiny.
Does it feel confrontational from that one's point of view?
No.
Okay.
Kind of the other way, like in service.
Okay.
Meek.
Normally I'd linger here a little while, but I'm going to invite you to slip out of that one and into the other projection and get a feeling for that one.
And then I'm stepping into what I'm projecting on Paul.
Yeah, so this is something from Ellen's system.
I feel intense and I think it's anger. I do feel intense and anger, sureness, righteousness.
So as the facilitator, I'm just going to invite that representative to take 2 steps back, just to give a little space to the other one. How is that?
All right. Because they're like it's called for, but well, it's fine.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to invite you just to wrap this up. Hopefully you've gotten some ahas or insights that are useful for you, or you can finish it on your own. Just slip out of that one and back into the representative for Ellen, who's looking at the 2 projections who are now just a little bit further apart. One of whom is feeling kind of small and overwhelmed, and the other one who's feeling kind of bigger and more intense. A little bit more space between them. What's it like for Ellen?
I remembered the sickness. I forgot that I had the sickness, but I think it's less. It's higher up, less. So not that throw up feeling.
And when you notice Paul near you, is there anything different about that, or is that still the same as before?
He looks a little more curious.
Okay.
He's stepping towards me.
So just kind of as a final ritual gesture, I'm going to invite you to point at the one that's your projection and say, that one's mine, and point to the one that's Paul's projection and say, that one's yours.
That one's mine, and that one's yours.
How's that feel?
That's right.
Yeah. So I'm going to invite you to allow the images to disperse, knowing that you come back to this at any time. So obviously, if we were to do a full constellation, I would like to spend a lot more time. And I'd probably want to find out minimally where Ellen's projection is coming from. And I'd have to gauge whether it was proper for us to know where Paul's is coming from. I'd have to sort of feel that one out a little bit. But I wanted to just give that little demo as an example of some things you can do with constellations in the mind. I'm going to move into as brisk a lecture as I can do, but any questions or things you want to note before I leap into that? Peter.
So I've noticed when I've done one-on-one constellations with people that if I'm dealing with someone who's got facilitator training or lots of representational experience, that I feel more comfortable with and usually can guide them to feel the unfiltered truth of the representatives. And I've noticed sometimes when I have people who have no experience with it, then sometimes the responses that come through are, very much have their own desires or filters or passions kind of layered on top. So
Absolutely.
Is there a way that you have discovered in the work that you're doing to either ease that or, this one is obviously the person who is creating the visualization internal is representing.
Right.
That format is just going to lend itself to that. But have you found ways of working with that to make it easier for those who are not the uninitiated or, to have a clear experience of their own representations without projecting their hopes and dreams for their healing onto?
You bet.
Yeah.
Yeah. In Ellen's case, it would have been stepping into Paul and going, I'm Paul and I'm an asshole, or something, right?
Or it could also be stepping into yourself and making yourself wrong, right? Like whatever the flavor.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. So, yes, I have a bunch of those in the lecture
Cool.
that I'm going to share with you, including it's not working, we need to actually get up and move around. If it's really not working. So let's go ahead and move into that. Okay, so constellations in the mind. The presupposition is that the field is everywhere and it's accessible in many different ways. So that's how we end up with constellations that don't involve bodies. However, otherwise they're not fundamentally different from floor constellations. But as Peter is pointed, changing the experience from embodied to in the mind can be a big difference for some people. It's kind of like getting used to physical representing. You want to tune yourself to this kind of perception. So the more you do it, the easier it gets. You're going to use your usual family and interview process to identify relevant roles. So in that sense, it's no different. Now this is the first bullet point for me. Unlike floor constellations, where either of you can be the lead for representing, these constellations really need to mostly have the client as the main field perceptor. The facilitator may be mostly bringing in the roles and choosing what roles to use, but the people who step into the roles is almost always the client. Otherwise, it can get too complicated, and it's really hard for them to connect with what you're seeing in your mind, as opposed to if you're doing it on the floor, at least they can see it happening, right? Therefore, as Peter implies, you really need to get a read fairly early on if this approach is working or not. You really do. You can always move to floor constellations. However, the facilitator, as I said, does participate, support, and add to perceptions. Your perceptions will lead to making choices like adding new roles or moving representations around. For instance, in Ellen's, I could feel the intensity of those two roles kind of too close to each other. And if I had been at a group constellation, I would have just invited one or both of them to take a step back, just to create a little bit of space. The setup is like a constellation meditation, as you saw. They close their eyes, get centered, and you ask them to imagine themselves in a space, and you do the same thing. So as they're describing things to you, you're going to have your own version of it going on in your head. Right? Doesn't matter if they're not, if we could take pictures of both of them, whether they're exactly the same. That doesn't matter. It's just you're doing it with them. And then you ask them to bring in the space, the roles you think are most important. Remember, the client themselves may or may not be one of the roles, as in regular constellations. Yeah. Add them one by one. Don't overload with too many. As in all mind-based attempts to access the unconscious, those of you who do any hypnotherapy know this, having rich perceptual details helps deepen the trance. Ask how the roles are arranged with respect to each other, what the feeling tone of the system is. Maybe you might ask how they're dressed, that sort of thing. It also gives you important information. Now, as again, Peter is implying, the biggest potential problem in these constellations is lack of distance. So one of the great gifts of a group constellation is the client sits on the circle and watches it. It's an extremely useful part of group constellations. So as a result, it can sometimes be hard for a client to notice the difference between imposing meanings and truly perceiving them. Don't forget that this is a constellation. It's critical to have the client step into representations, and you're going to have to get a feel for whether they're doing that. But when they do step into it, it does assist in client objectivity and learning about the system. And you can tell really, really fast if they're stepped in and getting authentic information, And when they're, you know, usually it comes along with, yeah, my father was always blah, blah, blah. And you're like, that's really good to know. What is it like to step into him in this system? Occasionally, as I did with Ellen, ask the client to step out of all the roles and look at it from the outside, seeing the whole system. As you perceive the system alongside the client, you can ask questions or make suggestions that move it along. And if you perceive something differently than the client reports it out, avoid correcting them. Instead, think systemically about how and why that meaning might be arising, right? It could be because they're not really stepped into the roles, or they may be perceiving something in the system you haven't connected with yet. Yeah? Now, this is another tip for you, Peter, in your question. Having multiple representatives for the client at different ages can be really helpful in these constellations. So childhood, especially if you're doing something about a childhood experience, which is not that uncommon, or at least a lot of the current day meaning comes out of childhood imprints. Having a representative for the child version of themselves, the present day version, the adult version of themselves, and sometimes it's even useful to have a future version of themselves. And they can step into them. It begins in NLP, we're actually really big in trying to create distance and dissociation from our present day self and the child self who had that trauma. And this is a way in constellations to kind of help make that happen, right? You know, we're in 2016, we're not in, 1970, right? The trauma is not happening now. It helps with that. And it begins to also support that client objectivity we're going for. As I said before, they can have meditation ritual aspects. For instance, for those of you who are familiar with this, I often start with the bleachers. So your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, 8, 16, 32, and allow the constellation to unfold organically from there. So I might bring in a representative for their problem, or a representative for an event that's relevant to the issue that they're having. And you're going to find particular techniques, tricks, little things that you like that work well for you. It's fine. You're not always having to recreate the wheel for yourself, as long as it seems to be working effectively in that constellation. Guiding a constellation to resolution is no different than from group constellations. You're looking for disordered orders of love and what needs to come into order in the system. You're looking for the likely entanglement. You're following what creates relaxation and ease and respecting what is stuck or resistant. You're looking for what is missing, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah? So, at this point, we're ready to move into the exercise. And I just want to ask if there are any questions before we do that, because we're going to spend all the rest of the time in pairs doing this with each other. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So any questions about any of that? Anything that was unclear? Simona?
No, I just want to ask if we can, before we start with the exercises, if we can have a short break so I can make myself a cup of coffee. Otherwise, I'm going to fall asleep here.
Yes, this is, we're going to have a 5-minute break. So I don't know if you can make a cup of coffee in 5 minutes. But after the question, yes, thank you for reminding me. I planned the break before the exercise. Yes, good.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Other questions about any of that? No? Okay, no point in doing the directions right now. It's 7:20 on my clock, 7:25. Come on back with coffee or whatever you need.
I'm back with my coffee now.
That was fast.
No, because I'm 3 hours ahead of you. So if I close my eyes, you know, it's very easy to fall asleep at this time.
Of course. Okay, friends, we're at 7:25. So I'm going to share the screen again. So here is the exercise. I'm going to put you into pairs, or Zoom is going to put you into magical pairs, the one who is just going to be just right for your learning tonight. You're going to go in turns. So each of you is going to go. You're going to get an hour to do this, okay? Or almost an hour, just short of an hour. So the way to do this is just really quickly decide who's going to facilitate and who's going to be the client first. Just decide. And then the client is going to present an issue. Ellen and I modeled that very well. Thank you, Ellen. Really simple, break to it very briefly. Obviously, this is not going to be a chance to do a full-on family tree interview. But you did see that I had to ask a few questions because I wasn't completely clear about the situation. I wanted to know what bad meant a little bit more specifically. And what a good outcome was. So by all means, facilitator, get the information you need to be able to do something, right? And then the facilitator is going to choose the representations. It's fine if the client suggests some, but the facilitator is going to choose them. They could be people or other elements, countries, depression, money, whatever, or a combination. And then the facilitator takes the client through a constellation in the mind. Notice at the top of your screen, there's this place where you can call for help. So if just a quick question for me would help you out, I will visit just a little bit just to see how everyone's doing. And you're going to have about more like 25 minutes each. So just get as far as you can, okay? And someone doesn't have their muting on. We're getting a lot of ambient noise. So if you don't have your muting on, if you could put on your muting. So that's what we're up to. So take a quick look at that. These are not complex instructions. It's basically do this with each other. That's it. Okay. Any questions before we get started? People feel like they know what they need to get started? Tanya, please. Can't hear you. There we go.
You said that we can ask for help, and I don't see the...
You won't see it until you get into the breakout rooms. And then if you just move your cursor, you'll see at the top. Can't remember what it says, but ask for help or something like that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Other questions? Everyone seem to know what you're up to? Okay, then I will send you off. 6 rooms. Oh, welcome back, everybody. Wow, some amazing work I saw going on. I want to just note a few things that I saw and then open it up for any questions or debriefing. First of all, what I noticed that very few of you as facilitators were having your eyes closed and imagining the constellation inside yourself. So I invite you next time you do this to try it and see what happens and if it helps. It's not like that's the right way to do it. It's just to see if that makes a difference for you to close your eyes and step into it with them. And then the other thing I noticed is that you may have noticed with Ellen, I was so specific about those two are there, these two are here, da-da-da, step out here, step in here. You want to be very clear and specific with instructions when there really is no visual guide. So I want you to step into blah, blah, blah now. Now step out, now place this one next to that one, or bring this one in, where are they? You know, whatever it might be. Just be very slow and clear, and notice when you're getting it, like you're moving too fast for your client or not being clear enough. One thing I realized, and I've known this before, but there's an interesting advantage, which is that to these over constellations, group constellations, is that in group constellations, representations almost always look like people. Most of the time, unless, you know, a pillow or a chair or a piece of art gets recruited in. I noticed in some of yours, what will happen is that clients will begin to see other kinds of representations, particularly when they're non-human representations like money or depression or other kinds of things. And just go with that. That's fine. There's no reason why it can't look like a rock or like a river or whatever. And then just one little thing to remember that this is a very subtle thing, but in family constellations, the adults don't pass things down to the children. The children reach and grab because it is incomplete and unhealed with us or with our parents or whatever. And so what we'll often find in a constellation is if a parent can be sort of halfway done with their healing, and they don't want the child to take on the blah, blah, blah. And the child says, I don't care. I'm going to keep taking it on until you're better. So it's, you know, we inherit blue eyes, but entanglements we reach up and take, which is a really interesting distinction in constellation work. And we'll usually keep doing it until there's some certain amount of completion, which is the only reason why we go back 2 or 3 generations, right? Right? You know. So anything you all noticed? Miracle healings. Something really nice you want to say about the person who worked with you? An obstacle you ran into that you want to question about? Whatever. So Simona.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Well, I enjoyed working with Ruth, but as well the fact that it really helped me to be able to see somebody else's perspective, because with the regular constellations we only see the picture, like the entire picture, but we are never really in that person to kind of understand where they come from. And for me, I could experience my mother, which was enormously helpful for me to understand the whole thing. So yes, it was really a huge piece of information that I received just simply from the fact that I could be within her for that period of time. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, and that was a point I made with the floor one-on-ones, to really think about every once in a while, I'll just have them step into mom or dad or grandpa or whatever it is, or the Holocaust, because it feels like that's the thing they need to feel. And by the same token, there are roles I won't have them step into because I just don't think it'll be helpful for now. Mm-hmm. But yes, I'm glad you had that experience. That's great. Yeah. And it is a limitation of group constellations. The client usually does not experience anyone but themselves. Yeah, Mihir.
Question. So when non-human objects show up in a constellation for our clients from the mental thing. Is it advisable, not advisable, okay to interpret them from a traditional symbology type of symbolism of those things, like a big oak tree or a rope or something, and like, okay, that probably indicates that, or of course checking in with the meaning of what the client is feeling, but is there any room for one of those traditional?
I'd probably start out with what's your sense of it. Ask the client first before you bring in your own map of that. But certainly oak trees and ropes, I mean, they have family constellations written all over them, right? I mean, trees, roots, all that stuff, and ropes, connection, all that stuff. So those are pretty, safe ones. If you see a snake, you might not want to call it a phallic symbol, because that's Freud. That's, unless it's really obvious that it is. So yeah, I would just start out with asking the client what their sense of it is. And then if you're getting, and by the way, if you're having a left brain, this is what X usually represents, step into it and check it. And see if you can get new or nuanced information about that left brain type of interpretation. Step into the oak tree. What do you get? And besides, the feeling will be so much useful than the interpretation anyway.
Right.
Right. The two of you can let's do the oak tree together. Whew. And that'll just be, and you almost don't need to say anything. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. But we are in the land of the unconscious here. So there is overlap with other types of kind of shamanic journeying types of processes, or waking dreams is another thing from Jung. There are lots of processes that kind of overlap with this a bit and can bring up those symbolic archetypal kinds of pieces. Questions, other questions or shares or amazing healings? I saw some really sweet stuff going on. Yeah, Peter.
So I was one of those where I had something non-human come up in the middle, which is pretty typical for me to have non-human systemic energy metaphor type stuff come up. And Anna Maria asked me to say to the thing, and this was genius, which is why I'm sharing this, you are my creation. Which in the context of this constellation was totally perfect and had quite an impact. And it's not it's a little outside of the family constellations realm. It's not something you would ever say to an ancestor or an act of history.
But you could say to a representative for your business.
Exactly.
So it's not unprecedented. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was wildly powerful. The whole thing ended up disintegrating and turning into something else. So it was just a really beautiful moment, something I hadn't heard before that I wanted to share. And thank you to Anna Maria for that. So
awesome.
Yep.
And it's possible Anna Maria could have tried that sentence and Peter would have gone, right? And then you go, oh, well, what's a better sentence? Which I heard a lot of you say as well to each other. And it's really hard to go wrong as long as you're willing to adapt and adjust to the feedback you're getting from the client. And yes, every once in a while, you step into the field so beautifully, you just come up with the gorgeous sentence that, you wonder where it even kind of came from. So good job, Anna Maria. That's great. Other questions or sharings? Or anything that seemed really difficult about this that you were really struggling with? Is that a hand, Anna Maria, or you're just tousling your hair? Yeah, Bonnie.
Just one thought that came to mind was I'd like to hear your suggestions for helping the client step out of that at the end. Both of us, we had to kind of say, well, we gotta quit here and move on. In a classic group, I've seen different ways that people separate and step out.
Right.
Curious what you suggest.
Right. Well, the best thing to do, of course, is be intentional about it. That's really important, instead of just, we've got to end now. Something along the lines, I invite you to allow the images to recede and return to yourself and ordinary consciousness, or something like that. That's kind of my pattern. If for some reason like this, something needs to be cut off, then just saying something along the lines of, we're gonna cut this off right now. We may not complete this fully in this moment, but we'll trust that the constellation will continue beyond this moment as you come back to full and ordinary consciousness. It's just the old constellations honoring and including what is, right? So trusting that something about the process remains useful and friendly, even if it's needing to be brought to what feels like a premature close. Is that helpful? Yeah. Ana Maria.
Yes, I have a question. I don't know if you can answer that in this context, but how do you do it in a regular constellation for the representatives when they leave the role? Because I have some representatives that they asked me because they were representing something very strong, their role was very strong, and then they kept a little bit, and now they don't want to participate anymore because they think they still carry that role.
Right. So I'm going to say something about this really, really quickly, because this is more to group constellations, and I'm recognizing the time. But and a lot of people have different approaches to this stuff. The first thing for me is presupposing that roles aren't sticky. The more I can role model that, the more that's the way people can experience it. Number two, if someone comes up to me and says it's feeling sticky, I'll just say, wow, something about this role was important for you. If it's still sticking, it's your stuff. It's not the client's stuff. I just presuppose this. The thing I do at the very end, anyone who's been to my group constellations has seen the ritual. We just go around in a circle and everyone says, my name is Leslie. I represented your mother. My name is Joe. I represented God. My name is Fred, and I was a witness. And we just go all the way around, and to each person, the client says, thank you. And for me, that's a fairly useful ritual de-rolling. And it's just a nice ritual, period. It's just a very friendly kind of closing kind of a thing that tends to allay most of that sort of stuff. Last-ditch effort, if someone's just really in a bit of anguish about it, I just pull in someone else and I say, will you just be the family of the client? And I have the person who's feeling sticky look at the representation of the family for the client and bow. Just bow. Just one more time. And I say, when you come up, if there's anything left, it's your stuff. And it's the gift of the constellation for you. So those are some of the things I do. For me, it doesn't happen very often because I so presuppose that you can go in and out and it's not a big deal. So
great, thank you.
Yep, there are some tips. So my friends, it's 8:36. I need to bring it to a close. Remember, if you have any follow-up questions or anything about the process that remains incomplete, you can email me, ask me questions. And your homework is exactly what you would imagine it's going to be. Do one of these for yourself or someone else. I actually do these very frequently on myself. This is going to sound crazy land, but I use it to put myself to sleep at night when I can't sleep. I'll just do little constellations in my head. And I've gotten some interesting stuff that comes out of it. So you can do one for yourself or find a friend and ask if you can experiment with them a little bit. I want to remind everybody that I still have available an hour coaching session on your facilitating by me here for $100, which was the premium price. It's usually an hour is $150. If you purchase it by the end of the course, it's still available to everybody. So consider that. Some people have taken use of that and seem to be getting something good out of that. So I invite you to do that, and I'll send a reminder email about it. And any other quick questions before people need to go? I really think this class needs to be 3 hours long. Okay, everybody, we'll have a wonderful evening. And thank you, everybody. You can unmute yourself and say goodbye to each other.
Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye,
everybody.
Thank you.